This is very exciting, and good morning, everyone. My name is Darlene Fairby, and I am at the University of South Dakota, and I'm also a board member with the South Dakota Humanities Council. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the South Dakota Humanities Council, which produces the annual Festival of Books. And we are very pleased to have so many people joining us for the virtual 2020 event. Before this event gets underway, I have a few housekeeping details. If you'd like to ask questions, please type them in the chat section on Zoom, which you can open by clicking on the conversation bubble at the bottom of your screen, and I will pass along as many as possible at the end of the session. Michael and I talked about this before the beginning of this session, and he is more than happy to have a more interactive question and answer period at the end of this session with everyone who's in attendance, and to just go ahead and have our tech moderator help us to turn on audio and everything at the end. So there will be a question and answer period at the end. If you have comments or something that you want to share, maybe a link or something like that, the chat might be a good place to put that. In addition to attending festival presentations like this one, we would like to invite you to visit the virtual Exhibitors Hall event on the South Dakota Humanities Council Facebook page. And on that site, you can learn more about many authors, publishers, and cultural organizations, and you can win prizes in the process. So that's on the South Dakota Humanities Council's Facebook page. So that the virtual Exhibitors Hall. And you can buy books by presenting authors at Zambrose's Variety special online festival bookstore. And for children authors, you'll find their books at Child's Play Toys. And on the SouthDakotaBookFestival.com, you will find buttons that will take you directly to the booksellers. And I will also copy links to those booksellers into the chat on this session. To help us continue to improve the festival, we'd appreciate your filling out an evaluation form. So we will email you a link to the form at the conclusion of the festival, and I will also post a link to the form in the chat section on Zoom. And finally, you can help keep the festival free by making a tax-deductible donation to the South Dakota Humanities Council. So you can visit the website, which is sdhumanities.org, and click the donate button. The festival would not be possible without the generous support of the numerous organizations and individuals who've already donated and are acknowledged on the back cover of the festival guide and on the website, and which you probably saw in the projection right before this session. So this is, I believe we are ready to, give me 1 second to open a thing. Fantastic. Okay, now I'm all set, and I'm very pleased to be introducing Michael Kessler, whose presentation today is called Letter Books of the Upper Missouri, Documentary Editing of Historic Papers. And I have a short bio of Michael and his work. He is an independent historical researcher from Williston, North Dakota, a former park ranger with the National Park Service and a retired EMT firefighter. He is also a U.S. Navy veteran. Casler studied anthropology and U.S. history at North Dakota State University in Fargo. He has published multiple articles on the Upper Missouri fur trade, and his books include Steamboats of the Fort Union Fur Trade, Forts Tecumseh and Fort Pierre Chouteau, Journal and Letter Books 1830 to 1850, and Fort Union and Fort William, Letter Book and Journal 1833 to 1835. So I will turn it over to Michael Casler, and we do have reactions in the bottom of our Zoom screen so we can give him a virtual round of applause without being unmuted. So thank you very much, Michael.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Williston, North Dakota. It's a beautiful sunny day. My window immediately to my left it faces east, so we've got the sun coming up, so I do look a little washed out. Nothing I can do about it. And so let's delve into the wonderful world of documentary editing. It's a rather dry world. And so most of today's program is going to be a PowerPoint because through pictures, artwork, you will be able to tell the complete story of the fur trade, not just the letters. And so, but I will get into what we were doing, Dr. Wood and I, and now with the publication of the Fort Union and Fort William Letter Book and Journal, we've completed working on all of the unpublished letter books from the fur trade forts of the Upper Missouri. So there's 3 letter books that exist for fur trading forts on the Upper Missouri, Fort Tecumseh, Fort Pierre Chateau, and Fort Union, spanning most of the 1830s to the 1850s. Now, these books really contain copies of letters, of outgoing letters by the bourgeois or the managers of the post to the different company officers and subordinates in the field. And while we never really get the response, you can make out a lot of information in the original letter to these folks. So Dr. Wood and I have transcribed 431 letters, which make up 776 manuscript pages. And then we annotated those to provide context to the material that you're seeing. So let's just go ahead and jump into the PowerPoint and we'll go from there. Okay, everybody see that? Okay. You'll note down in our names that I put the late Dr. Raymond Wood, and unfortunately for the world of anthropology, yeah. Yes, Darlene, I can't hear you.
Thank you. Okay. We are not quite seeing your PowerPoint.
Okay.
So it's showing us the PowerPoint icon and not the PowerPoint itself.
Okay.
So maybe stop sharing and then reshare on the open.
Oh.
So I think if you
Well, I had
scroll,
this working yesterday. Okay, so
I think you're going to need to stop the screen sharing and then reshare.
okay, let me do this. Let me get out of this. Okay, and 1 second. Okay, where is everybody? Okay, try this again.
Okay, now we're back.
Okay, can you see that now?
There we go.
All
That's
right, good.
fantastic. That's what we needed. Great. Thank you.
Okay. There's always going to be a technical glitch with this stuff, you know. Anyway, Dr. Wood passed away yesterday morning. It was totally unexpected, but he was 90 years old, and so I'm really at a loss because he has done so much for the world of anthropology and historical document editing. But let's go ahead and get going. So, for nearly a century, historians have selected from 7 significant fur trade manuscripts to reveal the workings of the fur trade in the upper Missouri between 1830 and 1850. And members of the fur companies created all these documents. The Columbia Fur Company and the Upper Missouri outfit of the American Fur Company. They consist of handwritten journals, 6 letter books that contain 776 manuscript pages, and copies of 431 letters written by the bourgeois managers of the trading post, officers of the company, employees in the field, and they cover a little over 20 years. A few of the letters were in French, which we had translated, but because most of these documents are written at a desk at a comfortable trading post, they're, for the most part, quite legible. So here's Dr. Wood. The documents today that's published are archived in the Chateau collection at the Missouri History Museum in St. Louis. And there's a picture of yours truly. So Dr. Wood and I set out to publish these important documents in their entirety. And we began this project in 2010 with the idea to only publish the Fort Union letter book, which expanded into the Fort Tecumseh and Fort Pierre material, and then ended up with the private journal of Robert Campbell. So we've actually published about 8 separate books and condensed them into 2 books. And so our goal was that all you have to do is turn around to your bookshelf and you can pull them out and you don't have to go to St. Louis and work with microfilm or the original documents. So here it is, it's all transcribed, and so in that way it's convenience to historians and stuff. And So one of the things that we tried not to do was to heavily annotate the materials. We felt that, that our job isn't really to define everything in every single letter, but rather provide the letter and let other historians steal our work, basically, is what our whole goal behind this was. And so, no ego, steal our work, go ahead, that's what we want you to do. And so the Columbia Fur Company was formed in 1822 as Tilton and Dudley, and became better known as the Columbia Fur Company, and shipped its goods to the Missouri River and from forts on the upper Mississippi River and then along the St. Peters, which is now the Minnesota River, to Fort Washington on Lake Traverse. This is an 1824 engraving of Fort Washington on Lake Traverse. And during our research for all this, we really discovered that this one fort was hugely important to the development of the Missouri River. And part of that is because in 1823, when the Ashley expedition was going up river and they got into a fight at the Ricker villages, they had to drop back downstream, but it cut off river navigation to the upper posts, especially at the Mandan posts. And so what the Columbia Fur Company did is they simply created a wagon route over to the Mandan villages. And so that explains why they were so successful in this. This is Henri Picotte, and he built Fort Tecumseh originally in 1822 at the mouth of the Bad River, opposite modern Pierre, South Dakota. And this man was the first bourgeois manager, and he remained in his position until 1827. This is a picture of the modern town of Fort Pierre, South Dakota, taken from the top of the Vendry Hill. And over kind of in the center, where the big brown, that two-story brown building is, somewhere in there is where Fort Tecumseh was. It's gone. The city is sprouted up over it. And so we'll never know. There's never been a chance to excavate archaeologically, but this is right at the Bad River. And John Jacob Astor's, this is John Jacob Astor, American Fur Company, eventually in 1827 merged with the Columbia Fur Company and also with Bernard Pratt and Company of St. Louis. And these companies were making a lot of money, but it was more convenient if they entered into an agreement with each other. You got to remember that the fur trade was a business, and that's what kind of gets out of doesn't really get talked about that much. You know, when we're talking about the cultural sharing between the different native tribes and the whites at the fur trade, and and the exchange of goods and furs, but it was a business, and a very successful business. And so the American Fur Company, this was Ramsey Crooks, and the American Fur Company was founded in New York City in 1808, and with Ramsey Crooks here was the was the field manager for John Jacob Astor's American Fur Company. And during the 1820s, the American Fur Company expanded up and around the Great Lakes and also on the upper Mississippi River. And eventually, by 1834, it encompassed the Missouri River Basin and the Rocky Mountains. It was a huge company. And that's part of the reason why when John Jacob Astor retired in 1834, he was the richest man in America. And his wealth that he accumulated from the fur trade was passed down to generations of families. And it was just a few years ago that Lady Astor in New York City wrote the last charity check from that account. And so they were able to contribute charity-wise, for almost 150 years afterwards, the descendants, from the money that this guy made. And his capable assistant was Ramsey Crooks here. So this Fort Pierre, and after it merged with the Columbia Fur Company and Bernard Pratt and Company, and let me back up a second. Fort Tecumseh was actually owned by the Columbia Fur Company, and then later became part of the American Fur Company. So you've got some different companies going on here, which also explains different letters and references in those letters, because the employees of the Columbia Fur Company came over to the American Fur Company, or the Upper Missouri outfit, as it's better known. But after they merged in 1827 and formed the Upper Missouri outfit, the American Fur Company maintained several important posts along the river, and Fort Tecumseh eventually succumbed to erosion in 1832, and the company erected Fort Pierre Chateau a few miles upstream from today's Fort Pierre and Oahe Dam site. This is a site of Fort Pierre, present day. We were down there here a couple of years ago. It's very quiet. If you didn't know what had occurred here, I mean, it's so important, so hugely important. So in 1828, Kenneth Mackenzie, that's this man, ordered men to the confluence of the Yellowstone and Missouri rivers in northwestern North Dakota to build a fort. Originally, it was only known as the Yellowstone Post for about a year. And our documents record the activities at Fort Tecumseh, Fort Pierre, and Fort Union for much of their histories. Fort Tecumseh and Fort Pierre records cover the greatest amounts of time and contain a great deal of new information on the fur trade and the men involved. And the reason I'm going to talk about both books today is because we see them as companions, and they play off of each other. And so the Fort Tecumseh and Fort Pierre Journal Letter Book was published in 2017 by the South Dakota Historical Society Press, and Fort Union, Fort William was just published by the same publisher this past May. But our documents commence with the Daily Journal at Fort Tecumseh by Jacob Halsey, and it covers the period from February 1830 to May 1833, and the letter book for Fort Tecumseh also begins in 1830. So this is the cover of the first letter book at Fort Tecumseh, and where the clerks got bored evidently and did this to the cover. So Kind of cool. But anyway, this is letter book A, and it contains entries for Fort Tecumseh between November 1830 and May 1832. So when Fort Tecumseh was abandoned in May, and operations were moved to Fort Pierre, and a month later, letter book B was begun at Fort Pierre, and the remaining four letter books, B through E, began at Fort Pierre, and were written from 1832 to 1850, but there's significant gaps in their coverage. Anyway, here is letter book B, and for example, there's a 10-year gap between letter book B and letter book C, roughly a year and a half gap between letter book C and D, and a 1-year gap between letter books D and E. And then the text ends abruptly on December 4th, 1850, at the end of the letter to Pierre Chateau. And this was Pierre Chateau. He was the heir of the Chateau fortune in St. Louis. He ended up owning all the forts in the Upper Missouri. That was his goal. And so when Astor retired in 1834, Pierre Chateau and his company in St. Louis bought the Western Department, which meant the Upper Missouri outfit, and including all the way out to the Rocky Mountain fur trade with the classic trappers that most people associate with the fur trade. Anyway, the Fort Union letter book, and this is a Beeman painting of watercolor of Fort Union. It's a wonderful picture. He did both pictures, by the way, the one of Fort Pierre and of Fort Union. And it shows so much detail here. It shows, the bourgeois house has a red roof, it's white, it has green shutters. The place was whitewashed, which was a huge sign of advertising back in those days. And all the forts above their gates, if you look at the gate area, right above it is a painting of whites and Indians trading peaceably. And so, for much of the period that these forts existed, they weren't attacked. They were not attacked. They were, Fort Union, for example, was built for the Assiniboine people. They wanted a fort in their territory. It's a prestigious thing to have a fort in their territory. And so they themselves protected it from other Indian groups. And also during the trade sessions, the traders would hire the warriors as somewhat like a police and to keep everybody in line and not to quell trouble if there was one. Now that's not to say that some young men would get it in their heads that perfect opportunity at these forts were to steal their horses, and that happened all the time. But that wasn't an attack. That was stealing horses as a prestigious thing among the Indian tribes. More horses you stole, the greater your fame was. But the Fort Union letter book, and there's one has survived, and and it covers the period from October 29, 1833 to December 10th, 1835. So it does not document the first 5 years of the existence of this fort, nor its latter years through the 40s, 50s, and up until it's sold to the U.S. Army in 1867, torn down, all the building materials brought over to Fort Buford, and where the soldiers at that time built, they used the walls, they built a three-sided fort with the southern part of the enclosure was filled with buildings. It wasn't walls, it was buildings. But it is nonetheless the letter book, rich in information, containing numerous letters alluding to the movements and activities of Prince Maximilian and Karl Bodmer on the river, and it documents the infamous liquor still that Kenneth Mackenzie installed at Fort Union in an attempt to circumvent the government prohibition against importing liquor into Indian territories at this time. The Fort Union letter book is unique in that there's only one such document for which a parallel account exists. And that is Robert Campbell. This is Robert Campbell. He was part of Sublette and Campbell, and they were opposition traders to the American Fur Company on the Upper Missouri, but they had started out as trappers with William Ashley and Andrew Henry, and had broken off, eventually bought the Rocky Mountain Trading Company, and then decided, well, they needed to get the American Fur Company out of the Rocky Mountains, so they set out, built a series of forts on the Upper Missouri simply to get the American Fur Company to buy them out, and then get an agreement where the American Fur Company stayed out of the Rocky Mountains. And that way they could get their money out of it before selling it, which is exactly what they did. And they got out with that. But the private journal of Robert Campbell at Fort William was published in 1964 in two parts with the Missouri Historical Society Bulletin. Robert Campbell, though, built Fort William at the confluence to compete with Fort Union. Unfortunately, his journal only covers 14 weeks, from September to December 1833. And even so, it provides both sides of the Mackenzie-Campbell trade war that eventually led to Campbell's departure from the fur trade on the Upper Missouri. And so, as I said, George R. Brooks published Campbell's journal in 63 and 64, and we've reprinted it together with Fort Union Letter Book for reasons I'll note in a minute. This is a photo of some of the pages in Robert Campbell's journal. And so even though it had been published before, we obtained copies of this, photocopies, and we went through it, comparing it to what Brooks had published, to what the journal actually said. And he actually did a fairly good job of transcribing it. We only found very few things that he had missed, and so we silently corrected that into the book. And so in that way, you have a better transcription of the Robert Campbell's letter book. But our project of transcribing, annotating, publishing these documents in their entirety was important because these letter books are the only such unpublished documents of their kind which still exist on the Upper Missouri. The Fort Union Letter Book is of special interest. It's the only one to have survived from the longest-lasting fur trading post on the Upper Missouri, and then with its competition with Sublette and Campbell, Fort William. So we obtained special permission from the Missouri History Museum, and we have combined the Fort Union letter book with Campbell's journal, and it provides the only example that gives both sides of the intense competition during the fur trade on the upper Missouri and reveals complications in the U.S. liquor laws that were made regarding the Indian trade. I see we've got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to cut the last few minutes of the PowerPoint out in order to take questions. So hang on. Okay, so I'd be happy to take questions. How do we unmute this thing? Anybody know?
I have made it so everybody can unmute themselves. So if
Okay.
anybody has a question, they can unmute themselves and ask away.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so do we have any questions? Anybody?
I have a question, Michael. If you could talk a little bit about, or actually what I'm curious about is what you found most difficult or sort of most problematical about the actualities of transcribing. So was it the handwriting or the paper or how you kept the notes, or were you typing directly into a Word document? I mean, what were some of the actual nuts and bolts of how you went about doing it?
That's a really good question. I don't know why this keeps stopping. Anyway, that's a great question because I would say the lack of punctuation and full paragraphs and complete sentences. And so in some cases, they would simply end a sentence with a dash, and that would be the next paragraph, but it was like right next to each other. So that's one of the things that we had to do is we judiciously added punctuation where we thought it would be. Some of the sentences had words superscript, so to speak. And we brought those down to the line and did that. And then we created paragraphs where there isn't really paragraphs in the original letter books, but that was what was intended. And part of that is, they only had so much paper to write on. As far as reading it, takes a while to get used to reading that, and reading cursive from 150 years ago, it really strains the eyes. Now, there's some words that we couldn't quite make out, and so we puzzled over those for quite a while. And in some cases, we just put in brackets what we thought it was, or to show that we couldn't make it out. A hot tip is a pro tip for everybody working with historic documents. If you get something that you can't quite figure out, get out your phone, switch it to camera and take a picture of the word and use it on your phone. You can blow it up and it won't pixelate like it does on the computer. And so, pro tip, it works really, really well. All right, next question. Anybody?
It might take people a minute here, Michael, to get themselves unmuted
Yeah,
to be able to ask their questions. There is a question in the chat from Cindy Wilson that says, she says, thank you, this was interesting. I have been looking for information about Old Fort George
Yes.
and find there are multiple sites. What do you know about that or those locations?
Well, I can tell you right now, Cindy, that Dr. Wood published a few years ago in the South Dakota History Journal an article about Fort George. And he goes into great detail about those different sites. And so that would be your source of information for that. Fort George was much later than our letter books, and so I think it's the Union Fur Company that built Fort George, and but he goes in. It's a great article, really helpful.
And Cindy says, thank you. She said, actually, she says, wonderful. Thank you in the chat.
You're welcome. All right, anything else? Well, I was glad to see that we have 18 people that got up early on a Saturday to listen to me ramble on about the fur trade.
Michael, I have one more short question for you,
Sure.
because I'm curious if you could say something about the, so when you were reading all of these letters, I know that these are essentially business letters that are being written, but did you get the feeling that these were being written as almost as public documents? Did they feel more like newsletters, or were they individualized? Did they feel like kind of private business letters?
Well, yeah, that's another good question. So the letters which were in the letter books were company property. And so those letter books could be sent back and forth to St. Louis or wherever they needed to be. On the other hand, Robert Campbell's private journal, I think you'd be shocked today to see his innermost thoughts published for the public, because that was the context that he kept his journal. But for the letter books, they were company property. There was a record of every letter that they sent. And so a lot of people, you mentioned letter books today, and people give you just dumb looks are still free. And you know, they have no idea what a letter book is. And it's basically one side of the conversation. And so, like I said at the beginning, you never see the second, you never see the response letter, if there is. But what's really interesting about the Fort Union letter book is they were writing back and forth to Fort McKenzie. And Fort McKenzie, we didn't get to it, was built for the Blackfeet people up near Fort Benton, Montana. And so it was considered the most dangerous post. And so the bourgeois at Fort Union, because Fort McKenzie was a satellite post of Fort Union, wrote 3 letters, and they're letters of succession. So they went to the manager there, that if you get killed, so-and-so's in charge. And then it went to the head clerk. If you get killed, so-and-so's in charge. And then it went to the next clerk. You get killed, so-and-so's in charge. You know, because that's how dangerous the post was. And it just was really interesting when I realized what I was looking at, because that is not in a single article or book anywhere. And there's new context in this. That's why I said, steal our work. That's what we did it for, is for historians and amateur people interested in the fur trade, you know, just pick off their shelf and read this without having to go through the rigmarole of going at microfilm or going to the actual archives. So anyway, I
No, that's fantastic. So does anyone else have another question or a question that you would like to ask Michael?
well, okay. Thank you.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, Michael. And enjoy the afternoon. Do remember I did put a link in the chat about filling out an evaluation form. So
Yeah.
if you could do that, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you very much. And you guys have a really good day.